Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the OK Grognard Show. Today is Thursday, June 25th, 2020, 9:30 a.m. Central in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. We're preempting our show's regular content for the next 5 days to focus on DM reviews of various Harryhausen work. We'll do a couple of these a day, today, tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday, and we'll finish up on Monday with one more. So we've got 10 of these coming your way. The first of them will happen in the normal time slot at 9:30 a.m. The second one of them will happen later in the afternoon. It's going to have to be kind of up in the air when it's going to be, but I'll try to let people know that day when it's happening. In all likelihood, it'll be middle afternoon, somewhere around 3 o'clock Central, so try to look for it then. Well, what we're looking at today is a DM review of 20 Million Miles to Earth. The idea is to look at the work, enjoy it, because it's Ray Harryhausen, in still form, which is to say looking at screen captures from the actual movie and reviewing them as potential parts for DMs from a DM perspective. So we're looking at the wonderful wonderful 20 Million Miles to Earth. So this is the story, in a nutshell, of a American spaceship which has gone to, we won't find out right away, which had gone to Venus. And when it returns, it crash lands off the coast of Sicily. And some people, some fishermen there managed to save one of the astronauts. They think they saved two. We'll get into that later. But they also discover an experiment, or what is labeled as a project, which is actually a alien brought back with them. And then, of course, craziness ensues because it gets loose. Somehow the environment of Earth, being different from Venus, causes it to grow in size. Before long, it is out of control, even though it is thought to be harmless, or potentially harmless. So they make some attempts to recapture it rather than just destroy it right away. And, well, we all know how that's going to go, right? So, checking out some of what we've got here. We look at this wonderful spaceship shot, right? Which is, it's just the best. It's one of the things that Harryhausen was kind of known for was the idea of spaceships. Flying saucers more so, but the idea of science fiction as much or more so than fantasy early on was his genre. And it's interesting that this particular rocket, which is flying in one of the opening scenes, is first heard, not seen. So there's a buildup of anticipation, and from a DMing perspective, this is something you definitely want to do. Don't just have people stumble on the already crashed rocket. Actually getting to see it crash, having it fly in, crash down in the water. The fishermen, of course, are nearby. Some of them are brave enough to investigate. They discover the hole. Good morning, Red Barn Games. Discover the hole in the rocket, and so they chide one another into doing something about it, since there must surely be men on board that could need saving. And you're brave, aren't you? And you were supposed to be the bravest man in Sicily, so, they work at one another and manage to decide that they're going to go inside, even though they have a little boy with them, which is, he's not going in, but still, bringing him close to this is pretty dangerous. I don't know what social services would say about that, but he's instrumental in that he can work the hook, which, this is all 10-foot pole stuff, right? This is the kind of thing that, and there'll be more 10-foot pole work later in this film, so keep an eye out for it as it's upcoming. They get inside and they discover at least one dead person, but the interior of this too, and let's talk a little bit about setting, is very industrial. Now, in all likelihood, they didn't build this set per se, but rather discovered some sort of industrial facility where they could make some adjustments to it, throw some smoke into it, and turn it into something that resembled the interior of what they could pass off as a rocket ship. And, yeah, right, Red, no doubt. There are age issues here, not just safety issues in regard to employment. The girders, you could see big bolt ends on here, so this is, although this looks almost like there might be concrete here, so that's a question, right? But when you get over to the panel and they do rescue one living astronaut, you can look at some of these panels. They definitely look like gauges, right? They're some sort of hydraulic pressure gauges. This might be a dam or a hydraulic facility of some kind that they've utilized. And then later, back in headquarters, now they get this fella out, and they also take out another fella. And we'll catch up with the two of them a little later on. They get them on the boat, they get them back. Meanwhile, at headquarters, this fancy solar system model, they've been tracking the ship. What is this? The top of a bell or something that's supposed to represent the sun? But they have the planets, and of course, Earth is. I think this is Earth because they're representing a moon around it. They've got this long thing here, and these others. Anyway, this is mission control apparently. But in the meantime, the fishermen have brought the two astronauts to shore. They're not in good shape. Off nearby along the shore, discovered by one of the, or our little buddy, who we got introduced to earlier. Ink Dweller, how you doing? Notice this is not a NASA project. This is a United States Air Force marked project, number 5. Some sort of goo in a container. Well, you want to leave that alone and turn that over to the authorities right away would be the sensible thing to do. But from a DMing perspective, of course, we know that he needs to open it up and empty it out on his jacket. This viscous liquid with what looks to be something inside, and rather than tell anybody, hustle it off and sell it to a nearby zoologist who happens to have enough funds to pay off 200 lira for an unknown blob of gel that a young fisherman's son has brought in to sell him. So he's got this trailer nearby this fishing town. He makes a couple of disparaging remarks about the low nature of fishermen, of Sicilian fishermen specifically. So there's definitely some language that wouldn't get used today, even though it's not expletives. In any event, there you go. Selling off project number 5 to his local zoologist. He doesn't know at this point where it's come from. He just knows some boy brought him a blob, probably pulled from the sea. He knows he's a fisherman's son. So this is the chain of custody of the... It's not a MacGuffin because it is a real actual thing that's important to the story. But let's call it the central object of discovery. He can check it out and see that there's something inside. And, this is good. We know this is a gelatin, right? We saw it slopped out earlier from its container. So they've taken some sort of they've made a prop out of this. And this is something that DMs can do that can be fun, is to make props like this. You could take a creature action figure and get some clear gelatin and put it in there, and then later let your players dig it out to discover what it is, only to find they should have left it be. Because apparently this is inert. Or is it? Well, meanwhile, over at the local hospital where a woman who is we'll find out later, daughter of somebody else in the story here, is manning the hospital, though not a doctor. They make a point of mentioning she's almost a doctor. We'll find out why later, apparently. But this poor sap, the second astronaut that was pulled out, is going to die. DMing tip here: don't have too many people with vital information managing to live. And use the consequences of things to drive the story forward. So him dying is kind of important to the fact that it makes our other astronaut all that much more important. So if we want to find out anything about what happened in Venus, what happened on the mission, now that every astronaut except one is dead and the spaceship is sunk to the bottom of the Mediterranean, we've only got one set of eyeballs anymore. Now, apparently they were able to track the spaceship, but they had no communications directly with it, or perhaps they would have already had all the information that they needed. So it's interesting. They've advanced rocket technology to the point where they can go to Venus, exit the spaceship in an alien environment where there is some sort of atmosphere, because there is life there, and bring something back that is then affected by our atmosphere in an interesting way, even though our astronauts weren't affected by the atmosphere there. Now, we don't see what's happening there. They probably had spacesuits, right? We know that science fiction was using spacesuits at this point. But the idea that they wouldn't have communications and wouldn't have already been sending data back just seems, even if it's just open up a line of communication, open up a radio frequency and speak. Here's what I found. Here's what it looks like, so on and so forth. But none of that happened. So if you're going to, once again, DM tip, if you're going to nerf some sort of basic function, you better have some way of justifying it. Now, this is before real space travel. They could easily have said something like the particles in space or the nature of space is such that it disrupts radio waves or communications. That would make it tough to explain how they track but can't talk to a spaceship. But you gotta explain that away somehow because it's a glaring hole, right? In For the movie, a plot hole, but for a game, if you were to transfer something like this or some ideas from this to a game, this is without a doubt a thing that needs to be addressed, or you just got to lose your players completely. You just got to be put off as nerfing something. Well, we find out she's actually also the daughter of the zoologist. So when she returns to, pardon the squeaking chair, to home, which is this trailer out on the outskirts of town, she discovers that the creature, let's start calling him Ymir, because he's actually named, even though I don't think they name him. And he doesn't have a vocal credit. They use some sort of I'm not even sure. I would have to check, but they use some sort of sound effect that they use to manipulate his voice. He's not voiced, apparently, by an individual, or at least not credited to be. In any event, Ymir has escaped from his gelatin chrysalis, or a casing, or from his stasis gel, and now she's returned home and turned on a light when she gets inside the place, and it startles Ymir. And of course, now the zoologist comes out. Apparently, even though everything was dark and he was supposedly in bed, he's all clothed. That's a little strange, but here you go. He puts on his special zoology gloves. Very important if you're going to deal with a marvelous creature that you've never seen before. He grabs the thing, takes it outside to his cages where he keeps chickens and other things that we would have seen in the... So it's important now that we know he's a zoologist. We know he's got cages handy. So this is inevitable that this creature would find its way here, because it allows us to put it into a cage. Very important for the story, I suppose. You have to have some way to contain it. You can't just put it in a box and pop air holes into it, right? So here we are. Ymir is caged. They go to bed, but by the next dawn, Ymir is bigger. Oh, isn't that a surprise? Must be something about our... this thing just grows fast. Of course, they don't know it's from another planet at this point. Although she has treated the astronauts, all he knows is he got this thing from a little fisherman boy, a fisherman's son, a local fisherman's son, and doesn't know its origins. So there's no real connection at this point to the larger story. But he knows he's got something of value. He paid 200 lira for it, after all. He's starting to think, I got to get to the zoology department at the zoo in Rome, so we're going to pack up and head over there. Meanwhile, of course, the muckety mucks, the big muckety mucks from the USAF, Starship Command, have managed to come over to Italy, and now they've got a powwow with the local officials, along with our still somewhat injured astronaut, apparently. High-tech sling there. So this guy in the center, big general, right? Guy on the left, USAF scientist. So we've got our two departments, two branches of the Starship Brigade covered here. Good to have people on hand. DMing tip if you're putting a story like this together or putting a situation like this together for a game. You definitely want to, if the players have certain questions, you want to be able to throw the right NPC at them with the right information. And if you need military information, it's going to have to come from the general. And of course, scientific information has to come from our space scientist. Now, of course, he doesn't know what's been brought back from Venus, except that this is actually the beginning of this scene. Is it's assumed that now this information has been passed along. Now that they're here, they've had a little powwow. He's reported. They've talked the locals into letting them recapture this thing on the advice of the astronaut, who says, well, they should be harmless. We didn't notice any behaviors. Of course, at this point, he thinks it's still small enough to put in one of those tubes. He doesn't know it's been growing. And, of course, the Italian authorities. You know, this guy's the prime minister. There's a local police chief also, we'll see later. Give them the go-ahead to put this, to go and capture this creature and bring troops in. We're not long after World War II at this point. We're in the 50s. So I guess at this point, American troops are not being hindered from entering sovereign soil of Italy. So they go. They talk to the fisherman and discover the fisherman's son has a secret, including this tube. He spent his 200 lira on an American cowboy hat. One of his favorite things, of course, is to play cowboys and Indians, as he says. And they discover when they find him before he takes them to the tube. This shorter fella to the right here is the local police chief, I believe they say. Of course, there's fishermen in the background. I'm not sure about this guy on the far right. But there's our Italian official, the general. Oh, I'm sorry. That is the American U.S. Air Force scientist, right? Anyway, of course, Ymir continues to grow, and eventually he breaks out of the okay, well, it's supposed to be a darker scene, but we've just lightened up the image. Now, don't forget, this movie was a black and white movie that they colorized later on. So there are a number of ways that you can enhance some screenshots from this to get better images. The program I use when I'm not using Photoshop just for simple things is this Irfan View. IRFANVIEW. It's a smaller outfit that's been putting this out for years. You can donate to them, but you can download it for free and use it for free if you want. It has a lot of pretty good uses, you know, just for changing sizes of things, changing formats, PNG files to JPEGs, to GIFs. GIFs. Everybody says GIFs, right? Bitmaps. You can move, you can adjust those files' sizes, resolution, pixels, do a bunch of things very quickly on the fly without having to open up Photoshop or disrupt what you might be doing in that. So I use this as a simpler program. He escapes. And of course now the everybody who's been tracking Ymir catches up with the zoology trailer, and they exchange information. Now everybody's on the same page. They know that Ymir is growing. They know that he escaped. They were on their way to Rome, so we've pushed the story closer to that location at this point. And Ymir, who is off in the wilds on his way to Rome, has discovered a farm, scares the horses, scares the sheep, scares a dog, but winds up in a barn. The dog, and if you can see that, maybe we'll do the same thing with this one, attacks him, bites his neck. They fall behind the thing. All we see is the occasional fist coming up and tail flopping around off to the right, while the shadow shows that Ymir winds up having to kill the dog. Dog attacked him first, though, but I think it's an interesting thing that they try to keep some of this off screen by obscuring the actual fighting. It does a few things. Technically, it makes it easier to deal with because I don't have to animate a dog and Ymir at the same time, which is a lot easier for filming, right? Also, I can do everything with a shadow. You can put somebody in a Ymir suit to cast the shadow and use a real dog or use a dog model, whatever. And story-wise, we don't have to see a dog get killed. There's got to be some sense in the producers' minds that we're trying to keep Ymir as sympathetic as possible. If we show him killing a dog, it's going to upset some people. And let's face it, DMing tip, if you've got a villain, and I'm not saying Ymir's a villain, but if you've got a villain in an RPG and you want to if you want to show how evil he is, have him kill what would normally be looked upon as like a pet. If he kills puppies, if he kills kittens, if he kills someone's hawk, maybe even a familiar, it purposefully targets a familiar, you're going to be portraying that villain, that NPC, in an evil way that will be universally reviled by everybody at the table, trust me. So they try to mitigate some of that because they're trying to keep Ymir as sympathetic at this point, right? Well, dog's dead. They come in, they bring a cart into the barn and try to recapture him. Some more 10-foot pole work here as our astronaut, who now just has a bandage on the arm and no sling, is at the fore here because he's a hero of the story, right? We already have him as a love interest with the almost a doctor nurse, and that's how he refers to her in the movie, so don't get on me about that. They just didn't want to make her too smart, I imagine, and show him up as a brutish hero. They want him to be an astronaut, USAF, and come off as an intelligent hero who isn't outshined by an NPC. And DMing tip there, right? We talk a lot about, in gaming, about having DM PCs, a player character that's run by the DM being toted along or going along with the group and always knows just the right tool to pull out of the bag, right? Always knows in advance what's going on. Well, two things here. One, that's not good because then it outshines all the player characters. And two, if you hold back, then you might be throwing off the players from discovering things because they think, well, if the DM doesn't have his PC, trying to pick this lock, then maybe we shouldn't be going through this open locked door anyway, or this locked door, opening it up and going that way. So, you can't win. There's no sense in having a DMPC who's going to disrupt the flow of play or disrupt the free exchange of ideas between player characters just by virtue of being there. So I'm not a big fan. Even NPCs that are toted along by the party. Something about hirelings and henchmen in early editions was that they tended to be fairly nondescript, and they tended to be background players, if you want to look at them in that light, or they tended to, they certainly didn't steal any spotlight, and we didn't know much about them. Not to say that they were disposable, but certainly some people treated them like fodder, brought them along, but still a better alternative to somebody who's along who knows everything the DM knows, whether they're telling you or not. Either way, they're saying something in a sense, right? Anywho, our hero pokes around with the thing and tries to force Ymir into this cage so that they can recapture him. Unfortunately, he starts to flee, and the local farmer grabs a pitchfork and stabs Ymir right in the back when he's running away. Of course, you know, Ymir killed this guy's dog, so let's give him a break too, right? He injures him. He turns on him. He flops the farmer around a bit where you're not really privy to whether or not he's dead. However, when Ymir then turns on the group, they all start open firing, and the bullets don't seem to do a lot of damage, so they back out of the barn. Notice they're quickly opening a door that I'm not completely sure. I suppose they barred it at one point to prevent Ymir from getting out, but now they need to get out. So they're kind of in a hurry. They do back out of here. They enclose Ymir in there. Interestingly, with the body of the farmer, injured or dead, they don't know. We don't know. So Ymir eventually escapes. Away he goes. And it's out in the wild now, and they've got to figure out what to do about it. So they hold another meeting. The Italian minister and his local police chief just want to destroy this thing. It's already hurt people, whatever. We're going to hunt it. The astronaut, with a backing of the USAF, talks them into, according to them, they're talked into not going after Ymir until they've had a chance to recapture it. Well, if it threatens the public, we can't let you do that. But if you can do this before there's any threat, all right, it's sanctioned. They formulate a plan that involves helicopters and soldiers and electrical netting, which is interesting. But also apparently the Italian police chief has access to a flamethrower, because they ignore their agreement to let them try to recapture him, and they chase off after Ymir with dogs and a flamethrower and actually start nailing him. So now, who's the bad guy? Here comes the helicopter with the netting. They manage to capture Ymir. They throw that on him. They stake it down with rebarb spikes, iron spikes, and then attach some battery apparatus, throw the voltage. And this is information that came out during the meeting, that they know that a controlled voltage can stun and sedate these creatures. Now, it's a lot bigger now. It's twice as big as humans now at this point. So they've got to be questioning their own mentality when it comes to trying to preserve the life of this creature, which, well provoked, harmed people, but harmed people nonetheless. And the bigger it gets, the tougher it's going to be to deal with as it continues to grow. So they take it back to the zoology department. Yes, this is apparently the zoology department of the zoo of the in Rome. So they take it to the largest population center. Interesting. DMing tip. Yeah, good idea. You're introducing conflict, right? This is part of the plan. Part of what you want to do is if you're going to be in charge of stuff, if you're going to push something in a certain direction, you can say, hey, yeah, you could close this up in a building. It's just going to keep getting bigger out in the wild somewhere, right? Put it in a silo, put it in a barn, do whatever you want. Those are the kind of buildings you have out there. Or you could bring it into this big facility where we could actually contain it and study it and keep it sedated with electrical equipment. It's all chained up. What could possibly go wrong? We have scientists all over the place and military personnel. Can't be a problem whatsoever unless there's a power outage for some reason. Now, what's the deal with this? They don't actually explain how this happens. But I guess it's fair to say that in the 50s, power outages were a little more frequent, and we knew they were going to happen. Maybe it's an equipment failure. Maybe there was a surge. Whatever. In any event, Ymir's escaping again. One thing we know about this creature, it's seemingly intelligent. It must realize it's getting bigger every day. It also doesn't like to be captured. It is not super vicious because it could have done a lot more damage even when it was smaller than or human size to people. So we know that the nature of this creature is not just to all-out attack. It's got these big claws. It could have slaughtered everybody in that barn if it just went on the attack. Of course, they could have brought out the guns, but we already know that the bullets really don't harm this thing. Anyway, it escapes. Well, of course, it's a zoo. It's a zoology department, and they've got elephants nearby because that's the Roman way. And when it busts out a wall of this place, it winds up in a place where there are elephants and people nearby, and it gets in a fight with the elephant, which attacks Ymir, and then shoves the elephant over right on top of our people, our wonderful humans, which are probably a guy that works at the zoo, and this guy had a big camera, so a reporter some kind nearby because of what's going on. So he crushes them, and then he escapes even further out into the streets. Now he's just grabbing human beings and flopping them around like rag dolls. And, of course, he's destroying infrastructure. Now, when he was just killing people, okay, that's bad. But now he's out there destroying property. And that, So the story takes a turn now where everybody's on board with the idea of killing this thing. They've actually started to call in for military personnel with bigger weapons. They've called for bazookas. They've called for tanks. They got more flamethrowers coming. All sorts of stuff now. Overturned cars. People on the street running away. They're scared. Well, Astronaut Boy, he's not far from the action ever, right? So he takes a car that he has and slams it into Ymir and puts him on the ground, and then he runs away. This is a interesting turn. I'm not sure how much damage a car would actually do to Ymir. His legs are pretty solid at this point. And cars were heavier back then, right? So using a vehicle as a weapon to take him down or slow him down. But they drive him into Rome's old ruins, right? They're driving him toward what will eventually be the Colosseum, of course. The soldiers are shooting. I don't know why. We know bullets didn't hurt Ymir when he was only man-sized. What are they going to do now? Well, apparently they annoy him. So maybe they're steering him toward the Colosseum because that's a place where we might be able to contain him. Now, here's an interesting thing, of course. If you have a couple of NPCs with a heavy weapon that might be able to win the day, have them ask a PC to fire it for them. Because you can't have your NPCs win the day. You gotta let the PCs do it, even if it means carrying the thing that will win the day to them and handing it to them. I know it seems kind of foolish, but there are conceits to why it would be possible. I'm not sure why the astronaut thinks he can fire a bazooka better than a couple of trained soldiers who are issued the weapon. But they give it to him, and he's aiming right for right for center mass, so I guess he knows what he's doing. But it doesn't finish him off. I'm not sure if he winged him or he missed completely, but he gets away. The soldiers chase Ymir up onto the top of the Colosseum. Once again, they give our hero another shot, so he's going to take it, and this time he hits him right in the gut. So he's gotten better. You give him more tries, right? And that's the way to make sure that that's going to all come out right. So story-wise, of course, we know why they're doing it for the movie, but story-wise, it's pretty thin that this would happen in this way, but we've got this beautiful location that we want to use, and it's the 50s, and the Italian government doesn't mind if we run around inside the ruins and produce a film. Just don't destroy anything. To it, of course, the American film company said, "Hey, how much damage can we do? It's a ruins." Okay. In they go. They fire up there. Ymir begins to struggle, almost falls off, saving himself though. But what's this down in the? These are armored personnel carriers, and that's a that's a mobile piece of artillery that they've anchored in place, and that's a tank. So now they've got all sorts of things, and of course the tank fires. Ba-boom, couple of shots. Now they must have built a wall to use for this, because obviously Ymir's going to be interacting with this wall, and they're going to need to destroy some sections of it to actually make the tank fire look like it's doing serious damage. If they're shelling this ruin, you can't use a real ruin, right? So this is the second shot. The first took out a portion of the wall over here, and now this one is fired, and of course Ymir falls, and apparently something, either the combination of the shell and the fall, whatever, has finished off Ymir, and down he goes. And then there's a little bit of falling action as it's a shame we couldn't capture him, or, if they ever get space travel, they're going to come here and kick our ass. They don't actually say that. They should. Because it's the Superman thing, right? We know that Superman coming to our environment makes him powerful, and apparently we don't know. What's the size limit of these things? I think there were some old Dragon magazine articles about the physics of giants. and how big giants should be able to get, how muscular they need to be just to be able to support their own weight in our gravity. And so that's a question you'd have to probably address. I think we get a good shot here of the claws, right, in the physical structure of the creature. The zoologist early on in one of those scenes when when it first comes out of the gel and the daughter comes home. The and he puts his magic gloves on to capture Ymir before putting him in the cage. Some of the dialogue includes the zoologist saying, "Oh, he has the torso of a human being." Well, physically structured in a similar way to a human being, sure. But is this a humanoid? Is it a monster? I think they try to um, play up the fact that unless he'd been attacked, he probably would not have fought back. Um, the astronaut certainly talks about this Venusian Ymir as if he is a thinking being. And so that is the conceit of the movie, is that we don't know almost anything about this other being, but we probably shouldn't kill it. Shouldn't be our first reaction to fear and to destroy it. And the interesting thing, though, is that their alternative, of course, is to confine it, cage it, and that's a thing they must realize is also antithetical toward good Earth-Venusian relations. So, there you go. It's one of those reverse stranger in a strange land stories brought here without with the thought that it was an experiment that you can just be transported here for observation and for scientific study. And then, of course, as with science fiction movies of that era, everything goes sideways, and then they have to deal with the aftermath. So there you go. From a DM perspective, this is the kind of thing that falls under standard cliche tropes for the most part, but there's a lot of neat elements in here. Looking at the settings, of course, big set piece kind of setting places like the Colosseum are included. We've got the shoreline, well, out in the Mediterranean first. The shoreline where we can have a lot of interaction between fishermen and the local populace, including the traveling zoologist who lives on the outskirts, so that's its own setting in a way, or its own location. We have the wilderness between wherever the fishing village is and Rome, and you know that was supposed to be on Sicily, so no, you know what? It was off of Sicily, so it must be on the toe of the Italian peninsula, because otherwise, how do they just drive to Rome, right? There you go. So we've got the whole lower end of the boot there as part of the setting, and we need one farm wilderness location, and then we need the Rome zoology department where they can confine Ymir, keep him sedated at least temporarily, and then we need the streets of Rome, and then we need the Colosseum. So we've got about a dozen different locations to deal with, which are good for various reasons. And then, as far as characters are concerned, NPCs are concerned, we've got USAF military and scientists. We got the astronauts. We've got the um, medical personnel in the form of the young woman who is billed as almost a doctor, apparently. The zoologist's daughter who has medical training. Let's just say that. Um, the zoologist, who's basically a stand-in uh, for the crazed, nutty professor scientist type um, trope. And you've got the fishing village personnel. You've got the young boy. I think that's the bulk of the people that are actually utilized. Dying astronaut, pretty much it. We've only got one monster in this, and they're definitely on the fence about portraying Ymir as a monster. Venusian, given a name despite that not actually in the credits. I don't think there's a point in the story in which they say the name. I think that was just the name that Ray Harryhausen had given to him. So there we go. Well, we're closing in on an hour, so we're going to end this DM review of 20 Million Miles to Earth in color. If you do pick this up, it's pretty neat. It's good little 50th anniversary edition. You can see that on the screen over there. 2 discs. Disc 2, some documentary stuff, remembering 20 million miles to Earth, the colorization process for those interested in that sort of thing. Tim Burton sits down with Ray Harryhausen for an interview. There's an interview with Joan Taylor, one of the few surviving cast members. David Schechter on film music's unsung hero. And they talk about a 20 million miles more comic book, The Further Adventures of Ymir's Friends, I guess. Video photo galleries and original artwork. So good stuff on disc 2. Disc 1, of course, the movie. You can use what they call chroma choice and toggle between the black and white version and the color version. And there are times when you're watching the movie where they missed a frame or two, and it'll revert to black and white before going back to color again. You have audio commentary on this disc 1 as well with Ray Harryhausen discussing the work, as well as Phil Tippett and Arnold Knert, who are associated with the film. Charles Schneer, producer, lifelong buddy of Ray Harryhausen, and promoted his early work and stayed with him for quite a while. William Hopper was that lead. And, of course, Joan Taylor we mentioned already. Story by Charlotte Knight. Screenplay by Bob Williams and Christopher Knopf. Directed by Nathan Geron. So Charlotte Knight is credited with the original idea for the story. But, you know, it's kind of a classic sci-fi of the day, of the 50s. It hits all the standard notes. The misunderstood alien, the fear of the unknown, the rapid growth as a trope, um, as a way of showing the danger, increasing the danger without actually making the alien itself menacing, right? Um, so it hits all the notes. In any event, that takes care of that for now. We are winding it down. We want to remember that later on in the day, we're going to be taking a look at our next one, which is Mysterious Island. Lots of creatures in that, so there'll be a lot more focus on creatures for that particular DM review. In the meantime, that'll be the second one of the day today. Don't forget, Monday, 29th of June. If you haven't signed up already, please do. On Facebook, Mysterious Island, later today. I'm thinking somewhere around 3 o'clock. Oh, no, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, I got something mid-afternoon to do, so we will probably be closer to 5 o'clock for that, now that I think about it. All right. And thank you, Ink Dweller and Red Barn Games. Appreciate it, too. Tomorrow, 1 million years BC in Valley of Gwangi, the dinosaur movies. Saturday, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and Jason and the Argonauts. Getting into the sword and sandals stuff at this point. Golden Voyage of Sinbad and Sinbad in the Eye of the Tiger on Sunday. Finish it up on Monday with Clash of the Titans, Ray Harryhausen's last work. We'll be looking at monsters and setting locations and all of these, and talking about their viability within an RPG. I want to thank everybody who follows the channel and jumps into the stream chat while you're here. Thank you. If you're catching up with this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and give us a thumbs up. Maybe make a comment. It would be appreciated. Enjoy the rest of the day, and Central Time, 5 o'clock. Let's make the call. We'll get it done by then, and we'll be looking at Mysterious Island at that point live in the chat stream here. Of course, it'll be up on YouTube later if you don't have the opportunity to join us at that point. Thank you again, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.